Atlantis, Part 1. Critias on Preclassical Natural Catastrophes. There have been, and will be again, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. The lost city of Atlantis figures prominently in modern culture, sometimes more thoughtfully imagined, as in this image by concept artist Joan Peak Lorenz. There is, however, only one original source. It was written down by Plato circa 360 BCE in his Socratic dialogues. This investigation is guided only by that one original source, as seen through the filter of modern science. In Plato's Timaeus and Critias, Critias joins Socrates, Timaeus, and Hermocrates on the day after Socrates presented his great treatise on governance, known today as the Republic, to share stories about nature, Timaeus, and statecraft, Critias, that promise to entertain, enrich, and inform all present. For his contribution to the symposium, Critias decides to present his account of a story, told long before this meeting, by an elderly Egyptian priest named Sonchis of Saïs, to the Greek elder statesman and poet Solon, who, according to Critias, was, quote, a relative and a dear friend of my great-grandfather Dropides, end quote, based on a transcript that was still in his possession. There is a story, began the Egyptian priest to Solon, which even you, the Greeks, have preserved, that once upon a time Phaethon, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot, because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth, and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Anyone in the present day with an interest in astronomy will recognize what the Egyptian priest was describing, provided we decode the mythology of his day. Helios is the Greek counterpart of the Egyptian sun god Ra, who in mythology drives his chariot across the sky each day. Astronomy buffs will clearly see in this passage a sun-like object following a non-sun-like trajectory and ending the way any meteor ends in its atmospheric passage, with a sonic boom and an explosive fireball, followed perhaps by a more widely dispersed heat pulse, as ejected and superheated spherules of molten rock rain back down into the atmosphere. The Egyptian priest himself, of all people, decodes this mythology for us. Now this has the form of a myth, continued Sonchis, but really signifies a declination of the bodies, moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which recurs after long intervals. At such times, those who live upon the mountains and in dry and lofty places are more liable to destruction than those who dwell by rivers or on the seashore. While modern events have yet to inform us, the Egyptian priest is simply recounting what was recorded in the archives entrusted to his keeping. We can infer based on his account that the greater thermal inertia of water in comparison to land had mitigated the effects of the airburst heat or subsequent thermal pulse of this bolide impact for those who lived near enough of it. Water, in other words, is slower to change in temperature and so acts as a damper on heat pulses in its vicinity, thus protecting those who live near enough of it from sudden extremes. What lends credibility to this account is not so much what we might presume the Egyptian priests to have known scientifically. Quite the contrary, we find credibility in the accuracy of his account on its face, despite his lack of modern astrophysical knowledge. We can thus reliably infer that something happened in the time of which he tells that is well understood today, as reported by those near enough to see it, but far enough away to be spared incineration, and high enough in altitude on that day so as not to be washed out to sea by the ensuing deluge. It would have been the spectacle of 100 lifetimes. We will find out shortly how we know that this astronomical interpretation of the Egyptian archives, though seemingly sensational on its face, is not even controversial, not scientifically and not statistically. On the contrary, astronomical observations over recent decades teach us that an account covering, think of it now, 9,000 years of human observation and record-keeping would be incomplete without stories of one or more major bolide impacts. How do we know these pre-classical natural catastrophes were significant? The Egyptian priest goes on to explain to Solon why records of deluge events survived to his day in Saïs at the head of the Nile Delta, but not among the Greeks. By contrast to incineration events, only the mountain shepherds survived. When, on the other hand, continued Sonchis, the gods purged the earth with a deluge of water, the survivors in your country, Greece, are herdsmen and shepherds who dwell on the mountains, but those who, like you, live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. Whereas in this land, Egypt, neither then nor at any other time does the water come down from above on the fields, having always a tendency to come up from below, for which reason the traditions preserved here, in Egypt, are the most ancient. On close examination of this statement, we can see that the Egyptian priest has just told Solon of deluges, rainstorms from above, as opposed to tsunamis, inundations from below, so severe that they washed all Greek coastal city dwellers out to sea, leaving only, as he put it, herdsmen and shepherds who dwell on the mountains to restart Greek society. Whereas just when you and other nations are beginning to be provided with letters and the other requisites of civilized life, Sonchis continues, after the usual interval, the stream from heaven, like a pestilence, comes pouring down and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. And so you have to begin all over again, like children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among yourselves. In the first place, you remember a single deluge only, but there were many previous ones. For there was a time, Solon, before the great deluge of all, when the city which now is Athens was first in war and in every way the best governed of all cities, is said to have performed the noblest deeds and to have had the fairest constitution of any of which tradition tells under the face of heaven. It soon becomes evident in the Timaeus that the priest refers by the great deluge of all to the natural catastrophe circa 9,000 years before Socrates, that's 11,400 years ago, that he claims to have put an end to a putative Atlantean power, against which the armed forces of the precursor state to Athens in particular had campaigned successfully. Without citing the celestial event described by the Egyptian chronicles as the cause of anything beyond what they further describe as one of the great destructions of mankind, it should be noted that if their timeline is accurate, then it fits rather precisely modern estimates for the onset of the Younger Dryas meltwater pulse 1b, shown on this chart as having occurred 11,400 years before the present. Let's recap. In the absence of direct modern experience, we should expect several major immediate consequences of bolide impacts, not necessarily all of which occur in each case, but precisely all of which are mentioned by Sonchis in association with, as Plato writes, many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. Heat pulses, as we would expect during atmospheric passage or in the ensuing fallout of superheated spherules of molten rock. Earthquakes, as triggered by the enormous kinetic energy of impact. Tsunamis, as triggered by oceanic or coastal impacts or by earthquakes. And deluges, a single day or night of excessive rain, as was recounted in Plato's writings, to have washed clean of topsoil the land masses and islands surrounding pre-classical Athens. The last of these, deluges, would result from the secondary fallout of moisture from an atmosphere suddenly supersaturated by an oceanic or ice pack impact. Because about 70% of the Earth's surface is covered by water, we should expect 70% of major bolide impacts to displace, vaporize, and eject a vast amount of seawater that would supersaturate the atmosphere, leading to a protracted deluge after the excess vapor cooled and condensed back out as precipitation. According to the Egyptian priest, the Greek islands lost topsoil to deluges not just once, but several times over the thousands of years covered by the Egyptian records.